You're on mute there, Hazel.
Super helpful. Thank you very much, Zoe. So welcome all to this keynote session, which is going to be a talk by Nathalie. Just to let you all know that we are the Interdisciplinary Research Network. This is part of a week-long symposium that we have organised with some support from the Sterling Fund. We also have an illustrator in this session, Millie. So Millie will be illustrating some of this. If at any point you do speak or turn your camera on and she has captured it, then please let us know and we will remove any details of you from this session. If you have any questions at any point, please do pop them in the chat and we'll try and get onto them. So without further ado, I'll just hand over to Nathalie and get started.
Thank you, Hazel, and thank you to everybody at Sterling for putting this on and inviting me. It's been great. I think it's been a good week. I will stop sharing my video now and I will share my screen instead so I can get started. Is this showing now? Zoe, you can see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we
okay.
can.
All right. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nathalie. I'm last year now, entering my last year of PhD in Science and Technology Studies at the University of Edinburgh. And basically, I have been studying interdisciplinary doctoral training. So this is some of the more practical stuff that I wanted to share with you today. I'm currently writing my thesis, and as I will see during my presentation, I've put loads of questions. Now, it's not an exercise that I'm hoping, there's no exercise there, it's just for you to go through and maybe reflect. And I'd love to have feedback at the end of the session. And maybe we can have a good conversation around some of the ideas, and you can tell me what you think. Right, so this is what I'll be talking about today. You might notice there's something about making toast there. Don't worry, I haven't lost the plot. It might make sense at some stage. We'll get to that soon. So, why talking about interdisciplinary PhDs? Well, I think as this symposium shows, it's really important to feel like we're not isolated, we're part of a community. And there are large cohorts of students who actually are like us, doing interdisciplinary research at various universities, and that is worldwide. So there are some well-known difficulties for research for all PhD students, but normally it gets a bit more complicated when we start working across disciplines. So in the UK, there's some literature about interdisciplinary doctoral training. There isn't much, but my research is empirically based. So what I'm trying to do is something very practical, rather than just the theory of how interdisciplinarity should be done. And I'm looking at the actual practices of doing an interdisciplinary PhD, and to present students' views. So it's my participants' views, and yes, I am greatly biased in that because I include myself in it. So I'm part of Science and Technology Studies unit at Edinburgh, and this is famous for researching all aspects of scientific research. They have very famous studies about labs and etc. But it's normally they talk about senior academics or scholars, not PhD students. So the literature on PhD students is more into the higher education studies, which is a different field, and STS and higher education studies just tend to ignore each other. So I'm drawing on both these fields And that is what I'm trying to do. I'm also drawing on organizational studies, but it's not the main driver. The focus of my research, so I am part of a Center for Doctoral Training, which is interdisciplinary. I've been part of it for the last 4 years, so for my master's before I started my PhD. And I am jointly funded with this by this CDT in Edinburgh. So it's great because I have access to students, to their lectures, to their seminars, to their labs, to absolutely everything. So that's really allowed me to immerse myself with my participants. So that is basically what I've just said. I've used multiple methods: participant observations, focus group interviews, informal conversations. That was before pandemonium hit us. I've assisted to loads of lectures and things like that. So I've basically have tons of data that I need to be getting on with. So moving on. So why focus on the practices of doctoral work then? Well, that's because practices are everywhere, and it's just a couple of examples there, and titles, whether it's in books, articles, or anything, always mentions the practices of doctoral education or interdisciplinary or research. But actually, I found that there's very little of this literature that draws on the theory of practice. So that's what I'm trying to do in my PhD. So here's Gabrielle, and she also talks about diverse aspects of research practices when talking about interdisciplinarity. And as you all know, I mean, I don't need to go over the definitions used, but yeah, research practices seem to be important to some people, but they're not very well studied. So here are some questions, some examples of questions that I'm asking about research practices. So, for example, it could also be helpful for yourselves as individuals if you want to clarify your understanding and what you're doing. As I said, I'm not looking for answers. It's just what it is we're doing and trying to think through that. So here we go, making toast. Beautiful toasters here. And what's that got to do with anything, I hear you ask? Well, practice theory can apply to all sorts of things. So toast can be as dry as theory, but I just thought it would be slightly more interesting and entertaining than talking about theory for the sake of theory. So what can we say about these pictures? Well, first, that there are different types of toasters. I personally like the glass one on the bottom right of the picture, if you can see it. I wouldn't advise you to look at the price of that one because it's astronomical. Also, when we make toast, we have different preferences, how we like our toast. And you can probably tell a lot more from these pictures. For example, as I just mentioned, the price of toasters are very different. But what's that got to do with practices? Well, we have to start thinking about what the practice theory can allow us to do with this. So according to Shove, there are different strands of the practice theory. It's a big family. I'm trying to follow Shove because I like the way it's been conceptualized. So they talk about, well, she and the team talk about elements of practice as being materials, competencies, and meanings. So practice are made of these three elements, and obviously that has implications then later on for what if something is missing or not. So when I was thinking about making toast, this is the type of things I was thinking about. We primarily just immediate thinking type of bread that you can put in. Do you have electricity? Do you have a toaster? Do you know what to do with it and why you're doing it? And there are many others. These are just examples of the top of my head. Now, believe it or not, if you want to know everything about toasters and more, Moloch here has written about it. Now, he's not looking at the more immediate stuff, he's looking at the bigger level of things. But yes, I agree, they're all part of the practice. Now, it depends where your focus is, but that's okay, because it shows that you can actually come in with a theory of practice at different levels. So you can choose to focus on some practices and background others, or decide how you're going to do this. So it's quite flexible. So practices of making toast. So these are properties of the practices, and that's still following Shove and their team. So the practice integrates all three elements when enacted. So that's I've just been saying that. So what would it mean if one element was different or combined differently, or you have a toaster, no electricity? What happens? Practices are embodied. So as humans, we don't own practices. Sorry, we don't own practices. We're carriers. We make them happen around the elements. So we're all from different cultures, backgrounds, communities. So what does it mean for practices? And hopefully, I'm still talking about toast there, but hopefully you can make the link to your research, and to when I talk about communities, that could be belonging to a discipline or a university or not, but basically you can see the link there, I hope. Practices are unpredictable and continually changing. So I'm talking about French toast here, which is not toast per se, but yes, there are so many recipes for French toast, and it's all called French toast, but it's not, nothing's the same. Elements enable and constrain practices. So I think that goes back to the first point, that the three elements are enacted together in practices. And practices construct what is acceptable for the community of practitioners. So my example is, if you toast a croissant, is that recognizable as a form of toast? I don't have the answer to that. I think it depends where you come from and what your culture is and what you're used to do. It's just to say that you can't just call a carrot an apple, because if people around you think it's a carrot and you keep calling it apple, then it's not going to work very well. So you can't just make it up. It has to be acceptable outside of your own practice, basically. So that was a very, very quick tour of the practice theory as I'm using it. And I'm going back to the PhD now. So I don't want to say interdisciplinary too often because it's too long and I will probably get my tongue in a twist. But there we go. So the practice theory applied to the PhD. So I've recapped here some of the questions from before, and I have included some of my answers. Now they're very personal, so don't get hung up about what I've put down there. I think just the same, I think these questions are often tools for reflection, knowing what's important to you, what it is you're looking for, what it means to you. And then I think it makes it a lot easier to articulate to other people. So the practices of the properties of practices, as I discussed 2 slides ago, what does it mean when, for us as PhDs, how does it influence our experience? Is there anything missing there? What can we do? And I think practices are every day, and I think every day we come across things. For example, we can't quite find, because we've got tons of data, we can't quite find what we need. We need multiple competencies to be able to carry out our work. So it's this type of stuff. And then what does it mean when we talk to people from different disciplines, different universities, etc.? So that is just a moment of reflection of what it means for your own practice. Some of the implications I have found during my research. So access to the elements of the practice are not easy to access. It's not equal or evenly distributed. So I think there's also a lot on us to identify what it is we're lacking and to voice these problems. Interdisciplinarity, well, we don't need to dwell on that one. I think we probably should all agree. The way things are done is open to change. So yes, flexibility, creativity. I think we're pretty much, from what I've heard this week and in the past, we are open to new experiences. So which elements of the practice are helping and which ones are not helping? So what I have found in a lot of my participants, the one major problem is when you don't get on with a supervisor or your expectations are not aligned, then it has a major impact on your practice as a PhD. And then belonging to a community, so making sense of those practices within a community, is all very well, but then which one? Because I think we belong to more than one community at a time. Right, I'm just trying to move on quite fast here because I would prefer to have a good conversation at the end. But does this look familiar? I think maybe it does. So as we know, well, I keep saying interdisciplinarity is not one thing and it's not one entity, although we always take the word for granted and we all know that there are different meanings and different concepts behind it. But this little comic here, that's to put interdisciplinarity inside the wider practices of research and universities, and maybe you can see the links there between some elements of practice and what actually happens in everyday life. This one as well, I'm sitting on the fault line, it says. Yes, interdisciplinarity is sometimes uncomfortable and we feel like we don't fit. As I mentioned before, there are a multitude of other terms that signify more or less what they signify working across or between or whatever disciplines. And now I will not go into trying to define disciplines because that's another can of worms. But to date, I've counted over 20 different terms. So I think sometimes it's important to really define what it is we're talking about or what it is we're trying to do as well. So what I have found during my research, academia is organized around the disciplines, and they're part of these disciplines, they're part of the historical practices of universities. They're persistent and they're persistently reproduced. And I think that's got a big meaning for us as interdisciplinary, because even though we're trying to get away from this, then the practices of the disciplines are constantly made and remade, and they're not changing very much. So what would you need to see a change? I think we'd have to look at the elements of the practices and identify where variation could be. It would have to be sustained over a period of time. I think it's pretty much what is happening right now. I have no idea if it will become normalized or not. But all I know is that it's likely to take time to change. So National Academy's definition of interdisciplinarity I think it's the most quoted definition. I don't like it very much because I don't think it's for PhD students. It mentions teams, advancing fundamental problems. Well, we're unlikely to change the world with our thesis, but what does it mean as an individual pursuit? Why is it important to us? What are our motivations is more what I'm interested in. So in contrast, this definition is probably getting closer to something I recognize. It could be very different for you all, but just one thing I'd have to say here is when she talks about cognitive advancement, I think it's a lot more than just cognitive. We do a lot more with loads of other skills. So why do we want to be interdisciplinary? And I've put some points there, but also just things I've found from my research mostly. So no need to answer that. However, Fish in 1989 said interdisciplinary is so very hard to do. And why? So that was over 30 years ago. And the proper push for interdisciplinary research started in the early 70s, which is over 50 years ago. So yes, it is still very hard, and we don't seem to be making very many tracks. So hence also my interest in the an interdisciplinary PhD. Why is this? Also, it's not helped. Some more difficulties here, I should say, about our PhDs. Some people just really don't think, they're skeptical about the whole idea, about the whole concept. And some people say it's just a fad, it's just a fashion, it's not here to stay, it doesn't produce anything better than normal research. And the literature also refers to a lot of risks to careers, and that's partly to do with what I've said before about universities being organised in disciplines. So if you don't have an intellectual home, it can be a problem for future careers. So from what I've said about practice theory and how I've applied it and what I've found out during my project, so these are some of the reflections, some insights that I have gathered along the way. So it has allowed me to focus on doctoral practices, but also asking, how are these practices different from interdisciplinary practices? Is it just the PhD that is changing? Is it changing? And what's it for? What's the role, basically? And there are a lot of questions in the literature about that as well. It's also helped me to think about policies, how policies actually direct practices in higher education. So there's the central logic I mean here is about the old idea of the myth almost of the university, how it should be, how it works. But then, for example, autonomous research. But policy practices of funding especially directs our research to be more and more interdisciplinary. So it comes into tension now. Anyway, just again some insights from my research. You might have others. I'd be happy to hear from your own experiences. So going back to when I said it can feel uncomfortable, so I thought I would do justice to my participants. Thank you to them, and put some quotes there. Maybe some of them are applicable to you, maybe they're not, but I think basically from what I've heard, they just keep coming back again. So it means that yes, it is uncomfortable, and often we have to put up with this. So some of my more practical conclusions. So first of all, well, we know there's no formula, so it's no good trying to look for a recipe. We have to make it work. We're here, we can make it, we can look at things in a different way, and I think that's what it's about, making new ideas, making new relationships, talking to other people, borrowing ideas, and being able to communicate these things. However, we're still evolving in an old regime of where the PhD is bound to a discipline and bound to the history of the university and what the PhD means and all that. So it doesn't mean that we should ignore these norms completely. So for example, here I'm talking about quality. I don't know if it's everybody's experience. Oops. I don't know if it's everybody's experience. Where am I? But I think we're still part of a field or a discipline. And even though our PhDs are interdisciplinary, we still have norms that we need to follow. And normally that's our primary supervisor's job to let us know. And it can be difficult when you have supervisors from different disciplines. Maybe I'm stating the obvious here, but I still have at the back of my mind the practices that we do during our PhD, and how having, for example, two very different supervisors could pull us in very different directions. So personally, I think managing relationship with the supervisors, but also with peers and the type of networks are the best tools that we have. Talking, sharing, and I think that's why this network is great, and it does a good job. And we'll expert eventually later on in the PhD. We'll expert in our topic, but it's important. It's not good to just pick and mix any old thing. As I said, it has to make sense to our community, to our field of study or whatever. So whatever we do, I feel we'll always have to justify our choices. And the good stuff, maybe you've noticed yourself, you can really zoom into your personal interest there, because you can really take your research in a direction that is personal to you. You certainly broaden your horizons that way, and it's unlikely that there are other experts like you, because there are so many different PhDs, but we're all doing things slightly differently with different methods, different subjects, different skills. So it's really great as well. So I don't want to say that there are just problems and issues with interdisciplinarity. It's also great. So what comes after a PhD? Well, congratulations, you're a doctor. And then what? So what I was thinking is, if we pick out some elements of practice from like the meanings we attach and the skills we have, our know-how, and if we reflect on that, then some of them can be really useful for our CV. Network, I think you're all aware of that, and if you're part of that network and you're here today, it's probably because you're interested in this as well. So looking for compatible careers. It's not just university, we can be researchers outside of universities, and there are many different careers. I'm a mature student, and I've still some careers I've never heard of whenever I look. So you're an expert in your topic, you've done your PhD, you've put a long time into it, and you've practiced for a long time. So what is it that you actually like? What do you want to focus on? Is there anything you want to carry on with? And if practices keep changing, then how do we adapt? So I think that's more over the course of how do we keep in touch with interdisciplinarity, or with our field, or with research, and how can we do that? And finally, if you choose a profession, then does it help to think about in the elements of practice, and what is it that you would like to practice in your professional life? I'm nearly there. I just wanted to touch on this collaboration booklet that we produced during the LaRue Summer School in 2019. It was a great experience, and it's for early career researchers. So collaborations are often talked, or interdisciplinary is often talked like it's always collaborations. It isn't. But if you're interested in getting into collaborations at any stage, then it's a good guide to access and have a look there. So there were some quick tips, I think, at the end of the summer school that people agreed on, and we find some common stuff about communication, using networks, follow your interests, and look after your relationships. I probably added at the end, be patient and be kind to yourself, which is, you know, not always the easiest thing to do either. So here, I have hot off the press. So Shape ID is a European grant that looks at, I think it means shaping interdisciplinary research practices in Europe. I think that's what it stands for. So they've launched a toolkit. It's actually online, available online right now, but the formal launch is not until next month. And I've copied there from their website what they're trying to do. So it's a massive resource about anything interdisciplinary, how to go about it, about careers, about support, about anything like that. I've had a quick look at it, and this as well is for early career researchers. So my supervisor, Catherine Lyle, is talking on Friday. I don't know if it's morning, afternoon. She will be specifically talking about this toolkit and hoping to engage with the participants on a discussion about what it does and what it's aiming to do, and maybe if you have ideas what you would like to see on things like that, and whether it's useful or not. These are just some general resources I've put there. There are always some of those websites there, always have some good blogs and articles. And that's it. I think I didn't take too much time. As I said, I was more hoping to have an open conversation rather than me just talking for too long. And I look forward to your feedback. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Nathalie. That's such an interesting and exciting talk, and it's certainly got us thinking a lot more about our own practices. If anyone's got any questions, they're quite a small group today, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Radio silence.
Radio silence. No questions. Yeah. Do you find this idea of focusing on practices? How does anybody want to talk about their experiences? About, you know, does that talk to you? Yeah, Zoe.
Thanks, Natalie. I was going to ask you about whether you think, you know, the focus on practices is something that is more kind of common in particular disciplines, or kind of, because it's interesting, it's practices is something I've looked at in my PhD topic, but not actually in terms of like being an interdisciplinary researcher, like what are my practices. So I just, it's interesting.
Yeah, but each I think that is the problem. Each discipline has its own practices, so different meanings, different skills that you need to be able to practice the discipline. So I think as such, I think that is why they're so constraining. Talking about disciplines here, they're so constraining because they represent a set of practices, of repertoires that people use, that is recognized by the community. And if you try and deviate from that and you bring in practices from somewhere else, I think we often take the example of, we use the same words, but maybe they mean something slightly different in different disciplines. So then what happens? Then we have a problem. So it's, disciplines don't just exist, practices don't just exist on their own. They come into contact with multitudes of other practices during our everyday life at university, teaching, researching, reading, writing, etc. We all know about that. So I don't think they exist in their own tiny little bubble. The problem is they come into contact with others, and sometimes there can be a great tension there. For example, I was thinking about interdisciplinarity as part of the practices of the university, which as the way it is organized now, the university. And I think for me, I'm tending to think that it's more a management problem, that everything has to be done through disciplines, and budgets are allocated to schools, departments, disciplines, etc. So how do our research practices fit in with the practices of the university? And then on top of that, we have the practices of the government, of the research funding, that is trying to say, oh, well, researchers are still autonomous. However, we would like to fund interdisciplinary research for this and this theme. So does it hinder our choices and our autonomy in this? What does that do? So it's practices come into every thing I'm looking at, basically. I know I can go on all day, but yeah, sorry.
No worries. Josephine's got her hand up, or their hand up, if you'd like to mute yourself and just ask away.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Nathalie, for a great presentation. Joining you from the University of Aberdeen.
Hello.
And it's been great to take part in this series of events. So I have two questions. The first one is about identity. So do you think that we're moving away from seeing ourselves as topic experts, so being an economist, being a historian, a marine biologist, towards being more methodological experts? So for example, being skilled in applying qualitative research in a range of different settings, or using, for example, R and Python for programming. So are we moving towards being methodological experts more than topic experts? And the second one is around language. You touched upon this already. Each discipline will have its own language, which they're very proud and protective of. And as we are increasingly doing more interdisciplinary research, do we need to focus on learning each other's languages, or actually developing more common languages to communicate in?
Oh, thank you for the great questions. Yeah, language, I think, is it's often used as a metaphor, isn't it? When we talk about interdisciplinarity, a lot of people have said to me, it's like I speak two different languages. I speak chemistry and I speak biology, but I can't actually mix the two. Finding common languages, it depends there again what we're talking about. So if we're talking about PhD students, I think there isn't that much of a problem, because we undertake our PhDs as individuals. So I think we're coherent within ourselves with this language. It's when we get to talk to other people in collaborations, I think, that it's more of a problem, because it's not only language that comes into that, but people have got different perspectives, different backgrounds, different skills, different. So I don't think it's about learning a different language. I think it's trying to learn how to listen to other people, give them a chance, and being flexible enough, open enough to take in what they're saying and see it from another perspective. And that sometimes can be very hard to do. So I think that's why it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But I think also if people start by avoiding jargon, then it goes a long way to enabling people to participate, because the more we use specialized language, and I think the more difficult it becomes. Talking about identity, are we topic experts or methodological experts? I think there's little doubt that we're going more and more, well, it's not new, but we're going more and more towards flexible workforce. So probably we'll all be holding different jobs during our life. It's unlikely to be the one job. And we need to carry on learning, and we need to what was it I was trying to say? So we're still, I think, experts in our topic, because normally interdisciplinarity, not always, but normally it's because you're focusing on a specific issue. So you become you are an expert in this topic, but also you become a lot more flexible, because you've played with different methods, different skills, different meanings. You've gone across, talked to different communities. I think it's this idea of we're becoming more flexible and able to more quickly adapt and adapt to new circumstances, new jobs, new fields, new research questions, etc. So I think it's more about adaptability and flexibility. Does that answer your questions, Josephine?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sydney, do you want to come in there and have the, oh, Hanneke, you got your hand up as well. We're just coming up to the end, so if folk have to shoot off, that's fine, but maybe Natalie, you don't mind taking a couple more?
I don't mind at all. No,
Brilliant.
the more the better.
Sydney.
Thank you. I think mine isn't a fully formulated question, but I just find this idea that you were just speaking of, you know, that being interdisciplinary means kind of having to learn to listen and being more flexible, and that's kind of at the root of it. I actually recently went to a panel that was talking about decolonizing epistemologies, and it was really funny. Well, one of the funny things was that they used so much jargon that I could barely understand what was happening while they were also talking about decolonizing epistemologies. But that aside, they also were talking about this idea of, without saying interdisciplinary, they were saying disciplines are basically colonial, very colonial constructions, right? And so that being interdisciplinary also allows us to be more decolonial in how we conduct research. So I don't know if you've come across themes like that in your research, like if that's been part of what participants have also talked about. But I know it seems pretty, I don't know, it seems obvious once someone says it, but I hadn't really thought of it in that way until someone said it at this panel. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's not something I've come across a lot of PhD students, and also because I was working in higher education at Edinburgh before I started my PhD. But actually, it's, as I said, it's I've only concentrated on one centre for doctoral training. And they do healthcare, optical imaging for healthcare. So these type of questions and issues haven't come up for me. And I think that's, again, is because I think it pretty much depends on historical practices. So where you are and which university, which subject, which field, it's all very, very different. So there are some general themes that come up, and we find that within ourselves that our experiences are quite the same, but also at the same time, I think it's very, things are very local. So no, short answer is I've not really come across that, but I've thought about it at the back of my mind. But yeah, no, but I think it would, being open instead of being protective of disciplines or fields or research, a willingness to being open and even listen would be sometimes a good idea, because I've been in positions where that is totally lacking, and I think doesn't work very well.
Hanika, did you want to come in then with your question?
I just wanted to say thank you to Nathalie, and I recognize so much of what you're saying. I'm just going like, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm also doing a collaborative doctoral research project, and I think language is really important. And at the moment I'm doing interviews, and I ask everybody I interview, because a lot of mine is about sustainability, and we have such academic notions of what that may mean. And I just ask every interviewee, what does it mean to them? And what does it mean in their practice? And how do they work with it? Because it's such a buzzword, and various other things. And I've noticed in some of my methods that my collaborative partner wants to achieve certain things that may not necessarily fit into this is how you do it. That's, you know, that I've been taught by the university, and then you try to merge and try. And I find it really interesting to have that conversation with the practical partner and then the supervisors and say, yes, but this is the aim of this thing. And therefore, can we be more flexible? So I don't really have a question. I find it really useful the way you've described it, and it's really making me reflect on what's happening in my own PhD. So
Thank you. That's great. So you're doing a collaborative PhD, yeah?
yeah.
It's highly unusual, I think. But I think, like with all collaborations, if you have a specific aim and interest, at the end of the day, if you agree with your partner on what those aims are, and then you look at which practices you're going to carry out to achieve these aims, so long as you agree on the aims, then hopefully you will converge at some stage. So good luck. But yeah,
Thank
interesting.
You.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's good. Thanks.
Thanks, Hanika. Were there any other final questions? I can't see everyone's screen at the moment, so do jump in just before we close if you've got one.
Maybe I've made everybody hungry with my toast.
Absolutely. That's perfect. No, thanks so much then for coming today and giving us your presentation. We've had you at the network before, and hopefully we'll have you again towards the end.
Maybe in person at some stage.
Yeah,
that wouldn't be bad.
that would be great. We can all make toast together and reflect
Yeah.
on our practice.
It's been great. Thank you very much for putting this event together, and I look forward to hearing from you all again soon.
Thanks, Nathalie. Thanks.
Have fun.
Much.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Great.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.